Okay. So, perceiving the return of Christ in the etheric, conscious of loving, tireless activities of the nature elementals, and help guide them. Again, that word guide came up. Sophia is the living Earth Mother in Christos initiation. That was kind of as far as I got with the summarization of the first part. And I thought we'd go through it again because it's a lot to ingest. And I could do this first, or I could try to play the recording with Robert Gilbert from the actual class because he gives a lot of background information. Maybe we should just do the overview first, and then perhaps as he's talking, some of that will be highlighted. So the Earth breathing cycle of the year practice, which was right where I ended, I didn't fully capture that, and I will before I'll send this out again with an update. So the in-breath, astroetheric process, inhales the spiritual sunlight, the cosmic forces from the zodiac, and we go into resonance with this process and can do the same thing as the Earth is doing this during this time of year. The astral body withdraws or contracts during this time. The Earth soul awakens. It's kind of foreshadowing a cosmic winter time where, as we evolve in our consciousness, in our individual egos, that's egos, not eagles, that we fully embody this practice that we're embarking upon in total. In this festival, the thinking activates the Christ within life spirit, permeates the earth as well as our souls, this divine light. And so this is like an interesting little point that this is a cumulative effect that's been going on for the last 2,000 years since the mystery of Golgotha. We've, steadily through each holy night since, there has been a evolution of consciousness as well as an accumulative effect taking place within us. I don't know how many times we've incarnated over that period, but I would believe it 2 or 3 times, perhaps, maybe more. I got a little bit further into the Black Madonna concept, where the darkness, the blackness is the hidden mystery there, or the secret to the symbol, as this Christ emerges from the darkness, the spirit self giving birth to the life spirit Christ in that darkness. And it's a new era of sun initiates that are going through this process. They can connect to the sun, S-O-N and S-U-N, and is this descent into the darkness, into the earth during the 12 nights. Part of that is the perception of zodiac influences that are working in the earth elementals. This helps connect us to the logos above them and provides a vision of the future Earth as we, it's kind of like the 35,000 foot view that can be had. Like as an aside, the 4 Gospels, each depicting 4 elements of the zodiac, the 4 corners. And you have the man, the bull, or the ox, the eagle, the man, the ox, the eagle, and the 4th one. How did I forget it? What's the 4 corners, guys? It's
Taurus, the bull.
That's the bull, and then the eagle,
the lion.
The lion. Good gravy. How could I forget the lion? Anyways, thank you. It's been a really busy day. Too much. So the first 3, the man, the bull, and the lion, are all connected to the earth, and the eagle, which is the transformation of the scorpion, mutation of the scorpion into the eagle, flies above the earth and can have a different perspective. It can see out far in both directions or in all directions, and so provides a different view where the future earth can be seen. That's where I was going. Experience our incarnations in each. An elf has arrived. It's just to say hi. Say hi, Gregory.
Hello. Hello.
So,
Hello.
and he's gone. There's Gregory. Connects the logos above them. So yeah, perception of the zodiacal influence is working in the earth elementals and connects to the logos above them, above the zodiac influences. So you have these hierarchical forces, and the solar logos is above all of those. Let's skip down. First level work. Oh yes, experience our incarnations in each zodiac age. I think I like, it was a key point that I picked out as I was rereading and condensing this, is to have this experience. I was quasi explaining that before. It's like we parts of us are still haven't fully incarnated, right? We can't get all in here. And so parts of us are still spread out amongst that entire zodiac configuration, and we can, but it's beyond that. This is also saying we can experience our incarnations during those different phases of zodiacal rule over what's going on here. And and the work we also did in those realms before birth. So like those two thoughts, incarnations before and our current pieces that are still there. So there's two levels of doing this perceptive work, and connecting with the wisdom of the hierarchy, the mothers, the wisdom of Sophia, the development of our spirit self as we allow the Christ these spiritual forces of the Christ to impregnate us. The second level is connect to the solar logos directly, connect to the spiritual world from which came the sun and the planets. Plants too, but planets. Going into resonance with this word of creation. It's kind of like a Corey thing with her cymatic demonstrations. Life spirit of Christ in the earth and in us, and a new clairvoyance that we're working on. This is kind of like our core objective right now, or one of them, is to gain this new clairvoyance, which we can perceive the return of Christ in the etheric, which according to Steiner and others, it happened began in 1933. And did everyone receive the file?
I got it.
Yes. Okay. Thanks. So Earth Soul contemplates. Soul connected to the earth, the living interactions between the elementals and the earthly Sophia, the living spiritual archetype with the cosmic Sophia. The Sophia, Earth Mother, widow, sons, daughters of the widow. I'll make a copy of this portion of the burning bush for the next time we get together and bring the book. So there was a community that formed 1,500 years ago or so, that called themselves the Friends of God, and they followed this supreme queen of all creatures and creation, which was an aspect of Sophia. These divine forces standing above the human are the father element and essential for our incarnation. And this is what gets cut off. It's like, in order for me to progress into adulthood, it's kind of like for Gregory, if, he gets to 18 and he's still, if he were still in diapers, something's not right. Or if he's not able to go out and stand on his own 2 feet. So there's a force in there that will be invoked in him that will want to sever. And it happened for probably all of us, to degrees. And we may need to have more of it or less of it, depending on where we're at. So the father element, so this way that which receives is the mother element, so we can go into this full resonance with the mother element. And this is really one of the reasons why I recapitulated this here is this, like, according to Gilbert, the great mystery teachings of the Western tradition kind of focused on this aspect. The early states of spiritual evolution, the earth spirit unites with the solar logos and the sun, which kind of Steiner talks about a time period where the earth was joined with the sun and the moon, and then the earth moon, I think that was the Saturn phase, the earth moon separated from the sun, and then of course then the earth separated from the moon. Our current stage, the earth is separated from the sun, the human separates from the divine father. And at the mystery of Golgotha, Christ unites with the earthly Sophia, kind of bringing it to the fullest depths. Excuse me. Fullest depths of this process, because he left the high spiritual world. The Logos, left the high spiritual world to enter into the vehicle of Jesus of Nazareth and have this experience that was cut off from the high spiritual world in which that being had come. And brings to completion this whole process of uniting with the Earth Mother and the Sun Center. So cycle the year macrocosmically. This is what's going on. Oh, we got lots of L's going on here. Let me check that. Somebody just beeped. I want to make sure I'm not missing anybody. Okay. So the microcosmic view is the human being gets cut off from the spiritual world during the Kali Yuga. Did we talk about the Kali Yuga? Anyone? Susie, I think you talked about the Kali Yuga, didn't you? Is everyone on mute?
Yeah, we mentioned it at one of the Elm meetings, or the last Elm meeting, about the cycles that we're moving into and out of.
Yeah. So this great time period of darkness that was like a 5,000 year period that, according to Steiner and other initiates, had it ending at basically 1899. And kind of with the great darkness that also came in at the same time. As an aside, like the whole discussion in Revelations about the Archangel Michael casting out of the heavens all these wayward spirits and casting them to earth. According to Steiner, that happened between 1840 and 1880. And so you have the industrial age coming about and everything around that, the mechanization, the mechanical thinking that the mind of metal, as Tolkien talks about it in Lord of the Rings. And so at the same time was this great impulse of light that came to Earth as well, because the Kali Yuga ended and there was a huge outpouring. The Pentecostal movement happened with Azusa Street back in the 1900s, and it carried on from there. Anyways, so cycle of the year, macrocosmic. Spring, the earth opens virginally to the sun's rays. Summer, impregnated with the sun ether. Fall, breathes in ether forces and begins to internalize. Winter, full gestation of the child, Sophia, earthly Sophia, impregnated by the sun, Christ. So that's going on cosmically in large cycles of time. And then what we've been doing in shorter cycles of time, but still very long, has been this. So this 3.5 day death-like sleep, during which one would kill the father element and unite with the mother within themselves. So this creative power of the mother, so that it's the full development of the I am. So Rosicrucianism, I don't know if looks like it doesn't work. Let's see, yeah. This Christian Rosenkreutz developed that in like the 1500s, initiation school that served, I think we looked him up once, or it's in the book. He was the reincarnation of St. John, as well as Hiram, who built the Salamis Temple. It's an initiation school that serves the Sophia, which is a big part of esoteric Christianity. So the Sophia initiates, loyal to the mother, sons of the widow, embrace the earth fully and use their gifts independently. So we have St. John's revelation of the woman. Alan Ross. So in John's Revelations, the dragon, which is the symbol of Ahriman. So we talked about the Ahrimanic forces, yes? Ahriman, Lucifer, and the Christ. So the tree of life pattern. Tree of life pattern. I didn't type enough words in. Yeah, it's better. Here it is down here. So, tree of life pattern. So you have 3 sets, 3 lines of circles. The middle one is the Christ, connects above and below. And then to the right and left is the Ahrimanic, or the Luciferic and the Ahrimanic. Pretty sure it's like that. Could have it backwards. But as you can see, it's all a part of the tree. That's what makes it so interesting. So we cannot get rid of the Luciferic and the Ahrimanic. We have to learn to transform the Luciferic and the Ahrimanic, because it's all a part of the same geometry and construction. So, but that's what opposes the Ahrimanic, is the dense material elements and darkness, that spiritual beings that oppose and endangers the woman. The Christos. This is a Greek term. Good and useful is the definition. It is about the life spirit, or the etheric body of Christ, or transforming the etheric body by the I am. So as we undertake the initiation process and allow the Christ energies, being, to impregnate, we use this etheric Christ energy to transform our etheric body. Fully ridding it of darkness is the objective. So we talked briefly about the 6th level initiate, the Sun Hero. There are 7 levels. Ravens are one of those. I'll look them up. There was another class that I took about the spiritual or Western initiation. So the Son of Christ, Christos forces in an individual become identical with the higher etheric life body of Christ. That's the objective. Creating a fifth ether, the moral evil of selfless love. And I gave you a picture of the Chi Rho symbol, which is the symbol of the Christos. It's also the symbol of the Christos, right? Because they both start with Chi Rho. And the Christos is the one that's been hidden, obscured. So the Christos is that life body of Christ that carries the spiritual good and virtue and provides some usefulness for work in the world and in the earth. So the three axes of space, right? Christos, earth, space, cube of space, becoming the spiritual alchemical retort for which we can do our processing, our work. That's why we came. That's why I'm in a physical body. Holy Gal, yes?
When you said you provided the picture, where did you share that with us?
It's in the document I just sent.
Oh.
This is the document.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. And I'll update it because I've made some edits.
Okay, cool.
There's some more to add, but you'll have that in the meantime. So there's a Holy Grail, octahedral Grail Temple meditation, which I didn't redo here, but in the cube of space with the Christ above and the Sophia below, and on each of the four sides, the four archangels, and holding myself in a container in a balance with those six forces. Doing this, the whole objective is to go into resonance, into union with the sphere of archangels, have that creative power living in the initiate. Good thing for spell. Initiate. Again, this is an initiation process to gain a new level of clairvoyance where we can perceive the Christ as well as in the etheric, but also in all earthly life. And guess what? That is where I got to with my summarization, because this was yet another chapter. So what we could do next is just let me tune into the PDF here just for a second to see what any questions, comments, suggestions? Anybody alive? Nope, all good. Thanks, Ben. Okay. So as we learned last time, the gate of the eagle is probably the 1st of December coming up. And that's the opening of the gate of initiation. That's why we're not desperately, but we're pushing through to have this become aware in our consciousness now, so this way I can go more fully into resonance with the spiritual forces that are rushing to the earth, and like this heavy wind, open up my sails and really make progress into this spiritual journey to enliven my being on all levels with this Christ impulse. So as we said before, Advent is the preparation period, basically 3.5 weeks. The winter solstice is a kind of part of the Advent time period, quasi, in which we do the thinking, feeling, and willing, thought, speech, and action meditation for those 3 days, as much as you can. Then the 12 Holy Nights representing this pause between the lunar and solar years, a gap that we can fill in and go into resonance. And then epiphanies the following 4 weeks. So right where I was gonna, in the paper there, I was gonna put this cycle of the year breathing exercise. With the in-breath, feel cosmic energies from all directions flood into the center of the body. For the advanced variant, inhale energies into the grail point of every cell of the body equally. They are all the center in the projective geometry sense. With the held in-breath, feel a sphere of gold in our center as the concentrated cosmic energies, and then in the advance in this every cell. With the out breath, feel all cosmic energies move from that sphere of gold outward, expanding a golden sphere around us. At held out breath, the golden sphere is a perfect sphere around our center, as large as tangibly feel and perceive it. So we did an exercise in the class that, quite frankly, I find quite challenging. And periodically, I try to do this meditation where we start, I don't know if I can find it in the teaching, but probably easier for me to write it out and to discuss it here. You start by sitting square in a chair and the eyes closed. There is a specific style of breathing technique that he uses that came from, well, it's a big rabbit trail, but it came from somewhere that he studied with, and it's oddly referred to as Darth Vader breathing because you make that sound of, a very guttural sound in the throat, which actually creates an energy field that a person can direct to clear the different centers of the body to kind of get them ready to do meditation, basically. And it's guttural. It sounds like this. And that's actually a technique to do exactly what I said, which was to begin to build a field of energy and resonance in order to start cleansing the body's field from all thought forms and such. So this way I can actually get into a meditative state to do the meditation. And the meditation that he was teaching was visualizing a point basically at the pineal gland, very, infinitesimally small point, and then expanding the point to like a marble size, and then, tennis ball size, and then softball size, and then, you get the picture, different sizes of spheres until the sphere goes out and out and out and out and does what is being described here in this breathing exercise. So the sphere is encompassing my entire body. And you can incorporate this breathing technique into it. And a part of that is actually to begin to train and exercise different etheric muscles to be able to hold those thought forms. So I don't know if you want. I think that's. Anybody got any questions on that, or I will type that out, or try to type that out in the paper. And I believe we did that in this course as well. We probably won't get to it here, but it's an effective tool for building. What did you do now? Oops, got to reopen it. I must have lost it. Okay, this is a good spot to try to see how we do. So this is Robert Gilbert, 2008, Winter Initiation in Asheville, North Carolina.
He would engage with it and talk about it and work to understand it with discernment. And this actually allowed some very deep esoteric knowledge to go to a deeper level and some knowledge to be corrected.
So I didn't get the intro to that. He was talking about Steiner's work and what he brought to the table.
And in previous classes, and also in my book on...
Is this clear? Can you hear it?
Spiritual initiation. There's a description of one part of that knowledge, and that is the eighth sphere concept.
Somebody speak up if
the
it doesn't work.
The concept came forth by the Theosophist at the turn of the last century. And then Steiner corrected many concepts related to the eighth sphere in his own work. The reason I'm saying this now is because this engagement with all esoteric knowledge and then illuminate it from the inside and understand it in a larger context has always been a major part of the Rosicrucian tradition, the Rosicrucian impulse, and of course is essential for any person on a hermetic path of initiation, which transcends the Rosicrucian per se. And so for the 12 Holy Nights, there's not only a description for every day in your handout for certain meditative activities and for the classical Western and Rosicrucian system of working with the 12 Holy Nights related to the signs of the zodiac and parts of the body, but I also include two other aspects for every day. And those two other aspects are the complementary Eastern system that goes along with the Western system, which has to do with the 12 signs of the zodiac from the Eastern perspective, not related to the 12 levels of the human body, as we have in the West, but rather to the 12 primary energy flows inside the body, the 12 meridians that we associate with Chinese medicine. And then the third aspect that's described for every one of the days is what I refer to as spiritual radiesthesia. So for those of you that know about the biogeometry work that we teach with our friend Dr. Ibrahim Karim from Cairo, or generally familiar with radiesthesia, what I've done is I have related one of the 12 bands in the life energy spectrum to every one of the days. And this actually becomes a powerful meditative process to use the 12 Holy Nights to actually look at the 12 different aspects of the life energy of the Godhead as it expresses itself in the world. And then in spiritual radiesthesia, we work with directly as a method of opening up sensitivity and perception in our own etheric life body. And so topics that we cover in other classes at Vesica having to do with the life energy spectrum, now we can directly engage with it, then become part of this meditative process for the 12 Holy Nights. Then on page 49, there's a simplified meridian flow exercise. That's a simple system to use that's based on my analysis of a number of different Asian methods to clear the meridians. It can be done fairly quickly and fairly easily. Then a overview of Epiphany. The Epiphany is the nodal point at the end of the 12 Holy Nights, which is really the crystallization of the entire alchemical process of the Holy Nights. Then we have some of Rudolf Steiner's calendar of the soul verses for the winter festival time. And then a reproduction of a document that I got from a Taoist source on mapping the 12 meridians on the hand, which can also be a kind of mnemonic device for mapping out the 12 Holy Nights on the anatomy of the hand. Then we have illustration of zodiacal correspondences with the body from the Western system, and eurythmy gestures for the signs of the zodiac. And then I've got on page 57 an excerpt from a German text that English translations of I have only found in England, and I don't believe they're available in North America. It's a very interesting text called Imprisoned in the Spiritual Void. Now, this text was written by a person along the Steiner tradition that was alarmed by some of the things that have been published more recently along the Steiner or Rosicrucian line, things that they think are kind of going off track. And in this course, we're going to be very non-polemic and very non-dogmatic, but it can be very helpful sometimes when people write highly informed critiques of various types of esoteric knowledge, because it can illuminate things that are very, very important to be able to discern in spiritual discussions. The upshot being that there's a reproduction of a couple of pages out of this text that have to do with some quotes from Steiner about what is the nature of the true human I am. That's directly related to the alchemical movement from the personal sense of the self to the transpersonal sense of the self, which is really the same thing as the Christ consciousness. So what I'd like to do now, to start with, is make sure that we're all on the same page. And so I want to review some very fundamental Hermetic and Rosicrucian concepts for you. Because once we have these concepts, we're then going to be able to go through some of the deeper information related to the winter initiation period, that you really have to have these kinds of things as a fundamental background. So for some of you, it will be a review. So I think it'll be helpful for all of us. First concept is the concept of 3 levels of manifestation. We often hear about the concept of manifestation from the macrocosm to the microcosm. And it's related to the Hermetic maxim of as above, so below, as within, so without, etc. The whole idea that everything in this world is a kind of fractal emanation of a higher world. But we need to be aware that the complete system, in its simplest possible format, it being made much more precise, but in its simplest possible format is really threefold. And there was a discussion that Steiner gave back around 1906 that's contained in this book called An Esoteric Cosmology, which was unfortunately out of print for many years and just recently came back into print. And when people ask me, where's the best place to start in studying Steiner's work? I always say this is the best place to start. Now that's different from what you hear in many anthroposophical Steiner circles, where they say start with Steiner's basic books. And then somebody picks up something like The Philosophy of Freedom and get completely overwhelmed by it, or they pick up an outline of occult science and it's too much. This book is extremely accessible, and it contains this particular piece of knowledge that I think is very important and not spoken of often enough. In this, there's the presentation of 3 different sacred geometric forms. And in our sacred geometry workshops, we really present the classical concept that sacred geometry is really a manifestation of thought forms in the mind of God. Everything that comes from the One, the Godhead, that makes up the world is a particular type of pattern, a pattern in space or a pattern in time. At the highest level, these patterns actually create the pattern for conscious spiritual beings, the beings that we think of in terms of what's classically called the spiritual hierarchies or the angelic hierarchies, or even the nature of the Christ being itself, etc. This understanding of pattern is what sacred geometry is all about. So we have the classical patterns of the point in the center of the circle, and then the 6-pointed star, and then the 5-pointed star. And in this particular discussion, Steiner then showed the connection between these sacred geometric archetypes, which are living forces in higher realms. And at the highest level of manifestation, we have the Godhead. And the Godhead is related to the point in the center of the circle. And this is not an abstraction. In the deeper level of sacred geometry, these particular patterns are related to something very practical, something very specific. And so, do you want to go speak to the person in the hallway? Thank you. And so, one of the aspects of this is that the point in the center of the circle is talked about in different traditions in particular ways. So that if you study with the Freemasons or you study with the Rosicrucians, they will say this is the sign of the Godhead. If you study astrology, they will say this is the sign of the sun. If you study alchemy, they will say this is the sign of gold. All of these things are true, and they're all related to a primal part of creating the manifest world and bringing the divine into the physical world. This point in the center of the circle is what in the Hindu tradition would be called the Bindu point. The Bindu point is the origin point. When we analyze how we live in the physical world in sacred geometry, one concept that we have is that our world is based on a cube. And to understand what that's all about, we start with the central point. The central point is said to have 0 dimensionality. And then the point becomes a line of one dimension. And so in ancient Egypt, you'll see these representations of Tehuti, who the Greeks called Thoth, stretching the cord. And you'll see this on the temple walls of Egypt. That act of stretching the cord is creating the first dimensional movement into space. Then you have the second dimensional movement, so that at that point you create a two-dimensional surface, and then you have the third movement. Our entire world is based on those three movements. So the physical world, with these three axes that you see here, that's the definition of the three-dimensional world in which we live. If we then connect up those three axes of space together, we then get this form of the octahedron that the Greeks taught was the form related to air. And the deeper aspect of it is that it's actually the form related to the astral plane. If you turn this astral form into a star through the process that in sacred geometry we refer to as stellation, then if you take a look inside this form, you see the three axes of space with the blue lines, and then you see the octahedron, looks like two pyramids base to base inside of it. And then you take the center point of each triangle on the outside of the octahedron, draw it up and out, and stellate it into a star form, and it becomes a kind of three-dimensional six-pointed star. That's called the stellated octahedron, or the star tetrahedron, after Leonardo da Vinci. And this is a form related directly to the human astral body. Now, as part of the deeper understanding of the teachings that I'm covering here at a bit of a gallop, there's a basic understanding of the creation of the spiritual planes, where we have the physical plane that's based on the three axes of space. And then when we connect the three axes together, it gives us the form of the astral. If instead of connecting them up to make the astral form by connecting the endpoints of the three axes of space, we were to create a wall on all six endpoints of the three axes, that gives us a cube. And so what the cube is an alchemical retort. It's a sealed alchemical retort for the evolution of consciousness and alchemical transmutation of spiritual beings to higher levels. And so when we understand that by putting a wall at the end of the three axes of space creates what in the Hermetic tradition is called the cube of space, we can begin to understand the nature of the physical plane in which we live. The complementary form to the cube in sacred geometry is that we see here of the octahedron, this astral form, because the physical and the astral are counterparts to each other. There are higher spiritual planes that are given different names in different traditions. In the Western tradition and Rosicrucianism, they might be called the lower and higher spiritual world. They might have other names in the East, the Nirvana plane, the Mahaparinirvana plane, etc. These higher worlds are actually only semi-dimensional or completely non-dimensional, by which I mean the kind of spatial activities and separation we have in the physical world don't really exist there. These are higher levels above the physical and the astral. The astral is the first true spiritual plane, and it's kind of a reflection of the physical. Because of that, perception on the astral plane has a spatial dimension to it. Things appear separate from one another. Spatial movement is somewhat similar to what you have on the physical plane. Not entirely, because things can interpenetrate in space in a way they can't in the physical. And it's also possible through particular means to have instantaneous movement from one point of the astral to another point without crossing intervening space. But nonetheless, when one actually has perception on the astral plane, there's a dimensional aspect to it, like the spatial separation of the physical world. So just a little bit of background here then on this idea of the creation of the physical world and how that relates to the astral. So going back here to this aspect of the three levels of manifestation and the Godhead, the point in the center of the circle is that first emanation point, that point before we had the stretching of the cord seen on the Egyptian temple walls, where the zero dimensionality of the point now becomes the line, then it becomes the plane, now it becomes the solid. The perfect movement from the point to create a space for a created world to exist inside of is the form of the circle or the sphere, because the circumference of the circle is equidistant from the central point. Now, there are many important initiation processes based on this knowledge. So this isn't something purely philosophical and abstract. What tends to be taught publicly is the philosophical abstract part of it. But all of this was directly applied in the ancient temple science. So by knowing that nature of that central point, for example, we can become aware that our consciousness itself is based on a particular process in which, through the senses of the body, we move our awareness and our attention outward from a central point, outward into physical space. And our physical senses then pick up particular ranges of vibration. So in a particular range of vibration, my eyes can pick up certain phenomena. A different range of phenomena is picked up by my ears, etc. So that's an outward movement from the center. But if we go back from 3 dimensions to 2 dimensions to 1 dimension to 0 dimensions to the point, that point is the crossing point to go into what we would think of conceptually as negative space. So what starts out as a philosophical concept actually becomes a direct experience. So that if we do a meditative process where, for example, we put our attention at the third eye center, slightly inside the skull, and first we become aware of the energetic sensation. From the physical, we go to the etheric level, and we will feel a kind of density or pressure or vibration. And once we locate that energetic center, in this case at the third eye, instead of moving our awareness outward to perceive in the cube of space around us, we instead move that awareness into the center, so that by moving into the 0 point, we then pass into negative space. We pass into whatever is in the center of 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 that centermost point of what is here. That actually then opens up spiritual vision. Spiritual vision is by moving into a center and having it invert and open up into the spirit. Physical vision is about moving from the center outward into physical space. So there are 2 complementary reflected movements. This has many different manifestations. One is the classical teaching about the way that when you perceive things on the astral plane, they will often appear to be mirror images. In the physical world, time appears to go from past to future. On the astral plane, it goes from future to past, which makes prophecy and knowledge of the future possible. Also, things that one perceives, again, will appear to be reversed in a particular way. So by understanding the point in the center of the circle, that emanation point, 0 dimensionality that creates the physical world, this concept of the Godhead actually is related to the highest level of the divine that is non-physical in nature, that creates everything from it. It's also the place of the One. In the ancient Greek tradition, the Godhead was referred to in capital letters as the One, that everything comes from. This concept of the One has been somewhat lost in some modern traditions, particularly through such things as trying to attribute a gender to the Godhead. The gender is only possible within polarity division. It cannot be present within a true source of everything that is unified or that is the One. And so that's why in the esoteric teachings of medieval times, even though the teaching of God the Father was something that was common in the medieval exoteric schools, you find the representations of the esoteric schools always showing the divine hermaphrodite, the person that is half male and half female, with a balance of the 2 polarities. Because the One, the source, has to be beyond any polarity division, has to be beyond any gender, anything of that kind. It is the source of all things. It's what the Chinese would call the Wu Ji, before that One divides into yin and yang. It's the great original source in the Hindu tradition that then divides into the primary polarity gender pair of the Shiva and Shakti. And so this Godhead level is the level of the One that everything else comes from. Then we move into the level of the macrocosm. The macrocosm is a created world. That's why it's not enough just to have a microcosm and a macrocosm. Otherwise, you're still kept at the level of the created world and you never get to the creator or to the unified source of being. The macrocosm in the Western and Eastern traditions has to do with particular manifestations of qualities of the Godhead as they differentiate out through the process of holy number and sacred geometry. So the 1 becomes the 2, becomes the 3, becomes the 4, becomes the 5, etc., and goes through the entire process that the Chinese refer to as the process of creating the 10,000 things. And every one of those numbers in the sequence, as the Godhead manifest from the 1 into everything in the world, is related also to particular shapes and particular forms. So as all the inherent qualities that are held within the 1 come out into all of their different differentiated functions and aspects in the manifest world, at a higher level of scale, it becomes the macrocosm. So one aspect of understanding the macrocosm, which is a very profound idea, and has many other aspects beyond what I'm describing now, one very important aspect that we find is that qualities from the Godhead will then manifest the larger structures in space. So classically in East and West, these are such things as the constellations, the 12 constellations that we find that are the background of the sun's visible movement on the plane of the ecliptic. There's actually then a path of the sun for these 12 forces in the heavens, or for the 7 planets, etc. And then in the Hermetic tradition, it's then understood that those qualities from the Godhead would then manifest into higher form, into a grander scale around us with the 7 planetary forces, with the 12 signs of the zodiac, etc., then manifest into the microcosm, into the human being, for example, where the 7 planetary forces become the 7 forces of the 7 chakras, where the 12 forces of the zodiac in the Western system become the 12 levels of the human body, or in the Eastern system become the 12 primary energy flows that actually sustain with divine energy all the organs of the body. The heart meridian sustains the heart. The liver meridian sustains the liver, things of that kind. And so we need to understand this aspect of 3 levels. This is part of a classical teaching in the West. So if you look at such things as the paintings of Raphael, Raphael has one particular painting that translated title basically means the dispute about the nature of God, that has 3 levels to it. And there's a human level, and then on the second level, they show the Christ, and then at the third level, they show what in the West is referred to as God the Father. But it really is related to this idea that there are 3 levels involved, not just microcosm and macrocosm. One of the dangers of the idea of cutting this out and just leaving these, other than the fact you never get back to the 1, is that this can then be corrupted into a form that is purely physical. And so one of the things that's happened in the last 100 years is that as we are trained in a system that teaches us to think in purely material references, and our understanding of spirit becomes something more and more abstract, there is a danger that Steiner referred to as occult materialism. Occult materialism is when we think of non-physical spiritual realities as if they were something physical. And this is something that we find more and more common as we look at esoteric teachings going from around 1879 and the start of the Theosophical Society to what we have today. There's more and more esoteric doctrines that have today become completely physical, that have become completely material. And they talk about spirit, but there's no spirit left in it. There is no non-physical spiritual source left in any part of the doctrine. And so the threefold system is really the minimal system to explain this. And just as the point in the center of the circle is a literal geometric form related to a thought form in the mind of God, related to the one and to the Godhead and the creation process, and to higher forms of spiritual meditation, so the same thing is true for the macrocosm and the microcosm. The macrocosm, Steiner showed connected to the form of a 6-pointed star. The 6-pointed star, when Steiner ran his own school of initiation, which only operated for 10 years, from 1904 to 1914, and it ended at the time of the beginning of World War I, and was never picked up again. It was one of the only times there was like a really advanced Rosicrucian school operating quasi-publicly. What we had in one part of their teaching process was teaching geometric forms associated with the human etheric life body and the human astral body of consciousness. And it was clarified to these initiates in this European Rosicrucian school that the six-pointed star is a form of the human astral body. And again, this form that I showed you here is actually a three-dimensional form of a six-pointed star. And the five-pointed star is a form of the human etheric life body. And it's quite a literal form, the one that you always see when the human being stands like this, and you have the life energy flows going out. And just as a contextual thing, because I'm just trying to put a lot of different concepts here into a coherent format to start out our conversation, what you find in, for instance, ancient Egypt is a representation of this five-pointed star energetic format with the energetic flows that come from the heart. And so if you look on the ceilings of the tombs and temples and things in ancient Egypt, you have a form of the five-pointed star that shows a kind of convex circle in the center, and then the points of the five-pointed star come out in the five different directions. It's not like a pentagram. You never see that hardly ever in ancient Egypt. Very, very rare. It's that central circle, and then the movement out to the five directions. And that's the form related to a representation of both the human being and the stars. So that movement out is that movement from the heart center as it then radiates in a flow from the heart center out to each arm, down to each foot, and then up to the head. Now that's a bit different from what you find in Western traditions and some other aspects of the Hermetic tradition, in which you then have particular types of interconnected lines creating a pentagram, a five-pointed star. So from the head to one foot, to the opposite hand, to the next hand, to the other foot, up to the head. These are other types of lines of connection. And there's a whole other story having to do with particular types of angles that create certain forces, etc. But again, what I'm trying to point out is that that five-pointed star is not an abstraction. It actually is a form of the etheric life body inside everyone's body and is related to the microcosm. But the microcosm is actually also a part of the human etheric life body. The macrocosm, six-pointed star, is an aspect of the human astral body of consciousness and actually surrounds the human energetic field in astral space. Now, this is something that you find not only in the West, but also particularly if you study the yantra systems in Hinduism, you will see time and again illustrations of spiritual beings like Ganesh, where they have the six-pointed star around the body. And it's in a particular format that shows you where the various lines come on the body. And again, if you look at Steiner's material from his esoteric school, he describes a bit about this. And I also contain this material in the illustrations in my book on the Western spiritual tradition, for those of you that have read that. So this is the beginning for us. This is the three levels of manifestation.
Quick little question, thank you. So with the physical body of the human being on a 2D level, the square?
Yes. The square and the cross are, if we were to take this down to the physical, square and the cross would be classical forms related to that.
The even cross, the equal cross.
Equal cross is one aspect of it. The Christian cross is another aspect, which is all I can say about it at the moment. So, three levels. Then we have to understand the concept of four bodies. If you study different spiritual traditions, they will divide the human being as a complete system into a variety of different levels. Very common system is divided into 7 different levels. And so you might say there's a physical body, there's an etheric body, there's an emotional body, there's a mental body, there's a causal body, there's a spiritual body, there's a divine body, things like that. And you can find it in different terms in the Hindu tradition, from the Chinese, from the Egyptian, etc., etc. But one of the simplest systems that we can use to analyze it, that's related to the teachings coming out of Egypt, and then as a foundation for the Jewish Kabbalah, is the concept of the human being being created by the 4 worlds. So the Kabbalistic concept of the 4 worlds has to do with the process of moving from the Godhead into stages of densification and materialization to create the manifest world. So any study of the Kabbalah usually begins with this concept of the 4 worlds. There's nothing present in the worlds of creation that is not a crystallization of something from the higher worlds, as above, so below. That means that every one of the bodies of a human being, physical body, the etheric life body, etc., has to come from somewhere else. It's a borrowing that a spiritual nucleus that we get from the Godhead then clothes itself with. And so we have the physical body. And in Sanskrit, in the Hindu school, they have a term in Sanskrit for the physical body that means essentially the sheath made of food, because they understand that our physical body is literally a sheath made of food. It's a borrowing from the physical earth. We form it into our physical body. And then at death, it goes back to the earth. It dissolves with all its constituents back into the earth. Now, behind this, there is something called the phantom. The phantom, when you see this in Rosicrucian or esoteric text, has to do with what is the original force outline of the human being, laid down by higher angelic hierarchies, actually related to activity of the hierarchy known as the Archai, and to some degree the hierarchy known as the Elohim. Anyway, I'm not going to go into the details of that, but the basic idea is the physical body has to be a borrowing of the physical substance of the earth, and after death it goes back. The etheric life force energy, what actually gives us life force inside the body, that every classical tradition discusses this, whether it's ki or chi or prana or ruach or whatever the tradition refers to it as. This etheric life force is what actually animates the physical. The physical in and of itself is dead and inert. So that etheric life force energy is actually a borrowing from the ambient etheric life force of the universe. This is very clearly described in things like the Chinese tradition, where when one does Qigong, they talk about taking in the cosmic Qi and then releasing it back out. So we actually take in a part of this ambient cosmic etheric life force that's in the world, and our spiritual core then uses that to create the animating life force body for the physical. In the ancient Egyptian tradition, they represented this by a ram-headed spiritual being called Khnum, using a potter's wheel to form a kind of a double of the person that is about to incarnate. And so they understood this process of the animation of a physical form of the etheric life force. In the Jewish Kabbalah, it's related to the esoteric knowledge of the animation of dead matter in the story of the Golem, where the head rabbi in the ghetto would be able to use certain Kabbalistic words or sounds to animate a body made of clay, so it could actually be alive and protect the dwellers of the ghetto. One of the classical Kabbalistic stories. So the etheric life body inside of us actually comes from the ambient cosmic etheric. And after death, it breaks up and goes back, except for the parts that we have individualized, the parts that we have illuminated with our own spiritual light and individualized can remain with us. And there's all kinds of both direct statements about this and many more veiled hints in both the Eastern and Western traditions about that process, particularly if you get into things that really focus on alchemical processes with the life body, particularly from the Chinese Taoist tradition, something that they really have very detailed knowledge about. Then we can combine together the emotional and mental functions in something we would just call the astral. The astral is a consciousness body of the human being. And so in some traditions, they break this up and they talk about the emotional body and the mental body. And in other cases, they just use the term the astral to mean both. And in some cases, they will use the term astral body and then mental body. And in those cases, astral means purely emotional. But for us, in a simple fourfold model, the astral is both the lower astral is the emotional body and the higher astral is the mental body. And so we have the common concepts of an astral body and an astral plane. So it's fairly straightforward that the human astral body is an encapsulation of the consciousness of God that is the manifestation source of the astral plane. So when we form a part of the astral plane to be our body of consciousness, that becomes our astral body. And then above all this, we have the human I am, the human divine core, the human spiritual essence. And so this whole thing in the Western tradition about the crystallization of self-awareness is what you find with the Old Testament leading to the New Testament, where Moses is on the mountain and asks for the name from the burning bush, and it says, I am the I am, and then leading to the New Testament with the 7 I am sayings of Christ, etc. So the I am essentially is that capacity for us to become self-aware, to say, I am. This self-awareness is a direct detachment from the Godhead. And so one classical concept of this is to look at the Godhead metaphorically as being an ocean of fire of pure beingness. And every human being gets one detached spark from that ocean of fire that becomes our spiritual core, our spiritual awareness. It is our part of the Godhead awareness. So this is a simple fourfold system. And having this as a system makes possible deeper understandings of the alchemical nature of spiritual practices and what certain things do in a larger sequence. So in many courses that we have taught, and in Sacred Geometry DVD set, I go into this in quite a bit of detail, there's a discussion of the way that in the Jewish Kabbalah, there's a book called Sefer Yetzirah. And Sefer Yetzirah means literally the book of formation. Yetzirah is the third of the emanated 4 worlds. It's the world of formation. It's related to life force. And in this book, Sefer Yetzirah, it talks about the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet all being divine forces. There are 22 aspects of the Godhead. And so the Hebrew alphabet is a divine alphabet. It's related to divine forces. It goes into very deep levels of the Kabbalah. But they're very precise in the book Sefer Yetzirah about the way those 22 letters are divided into 3 sets. This has to do with the coding system to create a human being, although the way it's described in Sefer Yetzirah is still a little bit veiled. I'm just going to cut to the chase on the whole thing here. And one of the solutions to this that actually was one of the first very clear public statements about it actually came in a public lecture by Rudolf Steiner that was contained in a book called Reading the Pictures of Apocalypse. There's a later title given to it, but it actually was a solution of this Kabbalistic mystery. Steiner never even mentioned the Kabbalistic mystery. If you didn't know that it was the solution to a Kabbalistic mystery, you wouldn't have put the pieces together. But it was one of those things where Steiner gave a lot of information that didn't always point to the significance of it. It's like if you had enough background, then you got it. And if you didn't, then maybe you study and get it later. So the division of the Hebrew alphabet in the Sefer Yetzirah is into 3 mother letters, 7 double letters, and 12 elemental letters. So with that being the case, what's hidden behind this is that there's a particular coding system to create anchor points in the human subtle energy anatomy that allow aspects of the Godhead to manifest in these anchors in the human physical and subtle bodies. Again, I'm going over fairly quickly a very deep body of material, but the basic idea is that the physical body is related to 12. And there's many aspects of this in sacred geometry. The cube of manifestation of space has 12 lines that define the cube. If you have a sphere, you can get exactly 12 equal-sized spheres around that central sphere, the 12 around the one, like the 12 arhats around Buddha, the 12 disciples around Christ, the 12 imams of Shia Islam, etc., etc. This 12 harmonic is related to the physical. And so in the West, we have, again, the signs of the zodiac with the 12 and the 12 levels of the human body, from the forces of Pisces at the feet all the way up to the forces of Aries at the head. And in the East, as we'll talk about later, it's the 12 forces that feed the human physical organs, or the 12 energy meridians. That's the 12 elemental letters described in Sefer Yetzirah. So these are 12 anchor points for the manifestation of the physical. Then for the etheric life body, there's 7 anchor points. It's what we think of today in modern Western metaphysics as chakras from the Hindu tradition. So these 7 chakras are the anchor points for life force in the human body. Then for the astral body, there's three primary centers of the head, the heart, and the hara. This is referred to in Rosicrucian work as thinking, feeling, and willing. It's referred to in Buddhist work as thought, speech, and action. It's referred to in the Sufi tradition as head, heart, and hands. And in the Chinese tradition, it's related to the upper, middle, and lower Dantian, which means upper, middle, and lower elixir fields, or alchemical transformation fields. So that this threefoldness is something that all traditions know about, and really has to do with what are the three primary centers for the activity of the astral body. The faculties of thinking, the faculties of feeling, and the faculties of the will and action. Now, that's all that's described in the Sophia Yeshua, 3712. But the final part of it is the part they didn't refer to publicly, which we can understand because when you study the old Jewish Kabbalah before the New Testament, we really need to be clear that the New Testament is a radical departure from the Old Testament. That's why there's all of these conflicts in the New Testament where Jesus is doing things the Pharisees get mad about because he's healing on the Sabbath and he's doing all these things that seems to contradict the law of Moses in the Old Testament. And he's constantly getting in trouble for it. And he keeps saying things like you need to observe the spirit of the law, not the letter of the law, and that you can't put new wine into old vessels and things of this kind. In the Old Testament period of time, you never talked about the one. You never talked about the I am directly. It was before the time, from a Christian perspective, of the actual incarnation of the solar logos into the physical world of the body of Jesus. And so that coming of the one into full manifestation within the human being, the flowering of the Christ consciousness within the human being had not yet happened. And so that's why in the old Jewish temple of Solomon, you had the Holy of Holies was draped off from the vision of anyone that entered the temple. Only the high priest could go in at a certain time of year. It was not something that the public ever got to see. The Holy of Holies is veiled. That's like Isis is veiled in the classic tradition. But in the Christian tradition, it's said that at the time of the mystery of Golgotha, time of the crucifixion of Christ and the union of the life body of Christ with the earth, they say that the veil in the Temple of Solomon was rent from top to bottom. And when it was rent, it then exposed what was present within the Holy of Holies. And that's the coming of the I am presence. What you had with what Moses experienced on the mountain with the burning bush saying, I am the I am, then becomes direct I am statements with the New Testament and the teachings of Christ and the crystallization of the capacity of human beings to be self-aware, not only at the personal level, but through higher development at a transpersonal level, a true Christ level. So that's the one. So 1, 3, 7, and 12 are important harmonic numbers. Now, again, this is a lot of material in a short period of time, and for many of you it's a review, but it's important to cover it because what we're going to see is that in understanding the initiation process of the year, and particularly the winter festival, we have to understand the significance of certain patterns in space and time. And so the 1, 3, 7, and 12 manifest in particular ways. When you construct in a particular time period, according to the state of human evolution at that time, a practical method for a person to undergo alchemical structuring and transformation of consciousness, then particular time periods will relate to structuring different coding systems inside the body that have the same harmonic number. So 3 days would be related to the threefold aspect of the astral. That's why you find things like Rudolf Steiner would say, if you have a question for the spiritual world, take it into your sleep for 3 nights in a row, and then you'll get an answer. Or particular spiritual leaders in the East and the West would have a particular thing they follow where a student has to ask for initiation 3 times. And after they ask the 3rd time, then they have to grant initiation. Or if a person's going to stabilize a thought form so it does not break up at the time of the polarity shift between day and night, which is a polarity method that the Earth uses to actually clear detrimental thought forms and can actually be used for healing as well, polarity methods, which is another story, then you can stabilize that by constructing the thought form at the same time every day for 3 days in a row. But these are classical teachings that you find, but they don't always tell you where it comes from. They don't tell you why do it 3 days in a row, for example. But it's related to the astral. Just like the 7 is related to the etheric, and the 12 is related to the physical. So we have 12 holy nights. We have a 3-day process of initiation with the winter solstice leading up to Christmas Eve. We have the Advent weeks with the 7. We have the Epiphany as the 1 day of crystallization at the end of the process, just to give you some idea of what I'm talking about. So we need to have this background so that when we talk about the processes, it makes sense that there are certain things that you would do in a 7-fold time sequence or in a 12-fold time sequence, etc. This is the context behind it. Okay, I see a lot of people going to the bathroom, so let's go ahead and take a 10-minute break. And I'll see you in 10 minutes. What's that?
Okay. All right, you'll have to unmute. And tell me how that worked for you. Okay, I take wowza awesome as it worked well. So what we it's now 9:30. There you go. Let's hear your voices.
Paul, can you repeat and clarify how the numbers 1, 3, 7, and 12 work? I mean, the 1 refers to the Epiphany, and the 3 refers to the 3 days between solstice and Christmas. The 7 and the 12, I mean, can you line that up for me again?
So yeah, the 1 is the crystallization into the center of all the work. The 3, 7, and 12 also referring to the Hebrew alphabet, the 3 mother letters, the 7 double letters, and the 12 single letters. But 3 is the astral body, thinking, feeling, and willing. It's the work we're doing at the 3 days of the winter initiation or at the solstice, and aligning those. I'm actually I will condense what's in the book for those. I haven't gotten that quite that far. Do you see my screen, anybody? Everybody?
Yeah.
Okay, so I've got Advent there. It's almost done. And so you got 7 days of the week and then the 12 holy nights, right? So what he's trying to do is bring to our awareness that these numbers are, when I'm aware of these numbers and their usage and what's going on, I can go into resonance with those thought forms that created the numbering system and the geometries around them, and work with them consciously as opposed to subconsciously. So, 12 is the physical body. The 7 is the etheric body, the chakras. And the 3 is the astral body. The 1 is the I am core. So what we could perhaps end with is I've almost completed the summarization of Advent, which is starting. Did I put it in here yet? I don't think I did. It's starting on Sunday. It's probably really, we've already looked at it. It's, so we'll start, I guess Sunday's the first.
So Paul, Epiphany is the crystallization. Then you have the 3 days, the 21st, the 22nd, the 23rd. You have the 12 days of Christmas. And what time span in the Holy Nights does the number 7 refer to? 7 what days? 7
Well, during Advent, you have 7 days, 4 weeks and 7 days.
I see. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And each day corresponding to a different area of the physical form. And then and then there's three time spans that he talks about as where did I put it? Remembering the sacrifices of the nation Jesus. Remember, there's two Jesuses, two lines, Solomon and Nathan. And this particular individuality went through 3 cycles those first 3 weeks, and then the 4th week hasn't been completed yet. And each week of Advent has a different theme. Number 4 also comes up with the 4 weeks. And so the first week being the physical body, and the Nathan Jesus, I abbreviated, was first permeated by Christ in the spiritual world in the last third of the Lemurian age, and the gift of uprightness. We reflect on how we've used our gift of uprightness and independent movement and actions, and it also refers, the child recapitulates these stages in his lifetime. When he first stands and starts to walk around, and then the second week, I've got the dates wrong, don't I?
Yeah, the dates don't make sense. They need to be straightened out because
Well, I'm working on it.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, there he goes. So, and then the second week, not November, but December. Is the etheric body an energetic feeling, and the Nathan Jesus gets permeated again in the beginning of the Atlantean period. It brings order into speech, just like a child gets or has, and we reflect on the expression of feeling life to those around us. Do I unify or divide with my speech? Exercise 7, armoring segments and the tonality of my speech. Do I express higher or lower nature in it? And then the third week is the astral body. This isn't done. I'm not finished the editing. Emotional feeling. And this is the third time that the Christ permeates the Nathan Jesus. The beginning of the end. See this? This goes here. Sorry, I got lost while I was typing. And we get organized speech, where we develop languages and reflect on how well I've developed right speech. Do I illuminate or create discord? Observe my words, content. Does it heal or wound, strengthen or weaken? And then continue to do the armoring segments, which I will summarize as well. So, and then the 4th week is the I am. And I didn't get that far. I was multitasking while you were listening. Okay, we talked about the 7 I am sayings. I'll write those out as well, and maybe make a chart for the 7 days of the week, different areas of the body, the 7 I ams. We looked at it here. Not here. We did it here. Not there. Oops, not there either. Sorry, it's late, long day. We looked at it here. And we 2 of Advent, but that's not what we're talking about. The daily practices, the 7 daily practices, the 7 I am sayings, and I will put those into a chart. This way it'd be easier to understand and condense it all and resend up the page. Okay, any questions? Any comments?
Thank you.
You're welcome. It's not just for you, it's for me too.
Oh, please send me the document. I didn't get it.
Oh, okay, yeah. Yep. It's okay. It's been updated, so I have to resend it anyways. I'll add it to the list. What we, I mean, I could, if somebody still has energy, I could go find the spot in the discussion where he talks about Advent. It might take me a minute or two, but it's been an hour and a half, and I don't know if anybody's got any brain cells left to do anymore. Any brain cells still out there? Should I try something else, or should we call it good?
Call it a night.
Yeah.
I only have half of one left.
do we we could schedule one more if you'd like.
I think that might be helpful. I'm still a teeny bit unclear.
Lori says she could do tomorrow night.
I think I could do that too.
Let me do something here real quick, and that is stop the recording. Stop recording.